Some animals don't come to save your life, old ranchers used to say. They come to lead you toward the truth. The wind screamed across the Wyoming plains hard enough to shake the windows of Cole Mercer's ranch house that night. Snow slammed against the old wood siding in heavy waves while the oil lamp beside his chair flickered weakly, throwing long shadows across the quiet room. Cole barely looked up from the untouched coffee cooling beside him. Nights like this usually meant nobody was foolish enough to be outside, not for 50 miles. That was why the sound unsettled him. A horse, somewhere beyond the storm. He slowly lifted his eyes toward the frosted window. At first, he saw nothing except white darkness moving across the pasture. Then lightning flashed far beyond the hills, and for one brief second, the outline appeared. A white horse stood perfectly still beside the ranch gate. Cole frowned. Nobody around those parts owned a horse like that. Its coat looked almost silver beneath the storm, glowing pale against the snow. What bothered him most was the way it stared directly at the house, unmoving, as if waiting. Cole grabbed his coat from the chair beside the stove and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit him like a wall. Snow crunched beneath his boots as the wind carried the sharp scent of pine and frozen earth across the valley. "You lost, boy," he muttered. The horse didn't move. It only breathed slowly through its nose, white vapor rising into the freezing air. Cole walked closer, stopping a few feet away. No saddle, no rope, no brand mark. The animal looked too clean to be wild and too calm to be afraid. Then it turned its head toward the northern ridge. One slow motion, like it wanted him to follow. Cole narrowed his eyes. Not tonight. The horse started walking anyway. Not running. Walking. Calm and steady through the snow. Cole should have gone back inside. Any sane man would have. But something deep in his chest tightened the moment the horse disappeared beyond the fence line. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the memory of too many silent winters spent talking to nobody except the wind. Or maybe it was the strange feeling that the animal hadn't arrived by accident. He saddled his old bay gelding and rode after it into the storm. The snow grew deeper the farther north they climbed. Pine branches groaned overhead beneath layers of ice, while the mountain trail nearly vanished beneath drifting snow. Several times, Cole lost sight of the white horse entirely before another flash of lightning revealed it farther ahead, always waiting just long enough for him to catch up. Nearly 40 minutes passed before the horse suddenly stopped near the edge of a frozen creek. Cole dismounted carefully, boots sinking deep into snow. That was when he saw her. A woman lay partially against the riverbank beneath a broken cedar tree, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of her breathing. Her dark coat was dusted white with snow, and one trembling hand remained curled tightly against her chest. Cole rushed forward immediately. "Hey," he called over the wind. "Ma'am." No answer. Her skin was pale from the cold, strands of chestnut hair frozen against her face. She looked exhausted, barely conscious. Cole pulled off one glove and checked for warmth at her wrist. Weak pulse. Still alive. Barely. As he leaned closer, the woman's eyes slowly opened. Fear filled them instantly. Not confusion. Not relief. Fear. Her lips trembled as she struggled to speak. "If they find me," she whispered weakly. Her fingers suddenly grabbed his coat with surprising strength. "They'll kill you too." Then her hand slipped away, and she lost consciousness as the white horse stood silently behind them in the falling snow. The fire cracked softly inside the stone fireplace while snow continued falling against the ranch house windows long after midnight. Cole sat beside the couch with his elbows resting on his knees, watching the stranger breathe beneath layers of wool blankets. He had dragged her inside nearly an hour earlier after fighting through waist-deep snow from the barn. Her clothes had been soaked from the frozen creek, and her hands had been so cold he could barely feel a pulse. Most people in Blackwater Ridge would not have survived another 30 minutes out there. The woman stirred slightly, her face tightening from pain. Even in sleep, Cole reached over and adjusted the blanket closer around her shoulders before standing to pour hot water into an old tin basin near the stove. The ranch house smelled faintly of cedar smoke, leather, and coffee that had burned too long on the iron stovetop. It had smelled the same for years. Quiet. Empty. Forgotten. He dipped a cloth into the warm water and carefully pressed it against the woman's forehead. Her breathing slowed a little. Up close, she looked younger than he first thought. Early 30s maybe. Her face carried exhaustion deeper than simple hunger or cold. There were shadows beneath her eyes that reminded Cole of people who had spent too many nights afraid to sleep. Outside, a horse snorted softly near the porch. Cole glanced toward the frosted window. The white horse was still there, standing perfectly still beside the barn under the falling snow. "You planning on staying all night?" he muttered quietly. The horse lowered its head slightly, but did not move. Cole had lived around animals long enough to know when something felt wrong. That horse did not act wild. It acted patient, like it knew exactly why it came. A sudden gasp pulled his attention back toward the couch. The woman's eyes opened sharply. Fear filled them instantly as she pushed herself backward against the cushions. "Easy," Cole said calmly. "You are safe." She looked around the room frantically, breathing hard. "Where am I?" "Mercer Ranch, north of Blackwater Ridge." The color drained from her face the moment she heard the town's name. "No," she whispered. "No, I cannot stay here." She tried to stand too quickly, but her legs failed beneath her almost immediately. Cole caught her before she hit the floor. She froze the second his hand touched her arm, as though expecting him to hurt her. That alone told him more than her words ever could. "Nobody is hurting you here," he said quietly. Her breathing trembled. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Then her eyes slowly shifted toward the front window. "The horse," she whispered. "You saw it too?" Cole frowned slightly. Hard to miss a white horse standing outside during a blizzard. Something almost emotional flickered across her face. Relief maybe, or disbelief. "I thought I was imagining it." Cole helped her sit back down carefully before handing her a steaming mug of coffee mixed with warm milk. She held it tightly between trembling hands, but barely drank. "What is your name?" he finally asked. The woman hesitated too long. "Clara," she answered softly. "Clara Whitmore." "Cole Mercer." Another silence settled over the room while the wind groaned outside the ranch house walls. Clara stared toward the fire like she was trying to remember what warmth felt like. Then suddenly, 3 sharp headlights appeared through the storm outside. Cole stood immediately. Tires crunched slowly across the snowy driveway. Clara's entire body stiffened in terror. The coffee mug nearly slipped from her hands. "Please," she whispered urgently, grabbing his sleeve. "Do not tell them I am here." Someone knocked heavily against the front door. The knock came again, heavier this time, rattling the old wooden door hard enough to shake snow from the porch roof. Clara immediately backed farther into the couch cushions, panic flooding her face so fast it almost looked painful. Cole noticed the way her hands trembled around the coffee mug. Not nervousness, fear, real fear, the kind that lived deep inside a person long before a storm ever arrived. "Stay here," Cole said quietly. Clara grabbed his wrist before he could turn away. "Please." Her voice cracked softly. "If it is the sheriff, do not let him see me." Cole studied her face for a long second. He had spent most of his life learning when people lied. Ranchers survived by reading storms, horses, and silence. Clara Whitmore looked terrified, but she did not look dangerous. Another knock echoed through the house. "Cole," a voice shouted through the wind. "Open up." Cole gently pulled his arm free and walked toward the front door while the floorboards creaked beneath his boots. The storm had eased slightly outside, but snow still drifted across the yard beneath the truck headlights. He opened the door halfway. Sheriff Walter Grady stood on the porch in a thick brown coat dusted with snow. 2 deputies waited behind him near the truck. "Hell of a night," Grady said with a forced smile. Cole nodded once. "What do you need?" The sheriff removed his gloves slowly, though his eyes kept drifting past Cole's shoulder toward the inside of the house. "We are looking for someone." "At 2 in the morning?" "Young woman, mid-30s, brown hair, might be injured." Cole leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Why?" The sheriff hesitated just a little too long. "Domestic dispute in town. Things got out of hand." Cole said nothing. The wind whistled softly across the porch between them. Sheriff Grady finally sighed. "Truth is, she attacked somebody before running off." "Who?" "A man at the church." Cole narrowed his eyes slightly. "Bad enough to send half the department into a blizzard." One of the deputies shifted nervously near the truck. The sheriff glanced back at him before forcing another smile. "We just want everybody safe." Behind the sheriff, the white horse suddenly appeared near the barn through the falling snow. It stood perfectly still beneath the dim ranch light, watching the porch. One of the deputies noticed it and frowned. "Where did that horse come from?" The sheriff turned toward it, and for the first time, His calm expression cracked slightly. Only for a second, but Cole saw it. Sheriff Grady recognized the horse. The animal lowered its head slowly and pawed once against the frozen ground. The deputy took a nervous step backward. "That thing has been staring at us since we pulled in," he muttered. "It is just a horse," the sheriff snapped too quickly. Then he looked back at Cole. "Mind if we come inside and warm up while we ask a few questions?" Cole did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on the sheriff's face. Something about the man felt wrong tonight. Too tense. Too careful. As if he was afraid of something slipping out. "Nobody here except me," Cole finally said. "Storm probably drove her farther east." Sheriff Grady studied him quietly. The two men had known each other nearly 15 years, long enough to recognize when the other was hiding something. The silence stretched painfully thin. Then Clara accidentally knocked over the metal spoon beside the fireplace. The tiny sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. One deputy immediately looked toward the window. The sheriff's face hardened. "Cole," he said slowly. "Who is inside?" Before Cole could answer, the white horse suddenly let out a loud, sharp cry from the yard. Every horse on the ranch answered instantly from the barn, stomping wildly against their stalls. The deputies turned in surprise toward the noise outside. Cole stepped forward immediately, blocking the doorway. "My horses get restless during storms," he said firmly. Sheriff Grady stared at him for another long moment before finally pulling his gloves back on. "If you see her," he said quietly, "you call me first." Then he leaned slightly closer. "Some people bring trouble wherever they go." Cole watched the truck disappear into the snowy darkness several minutes later before shutting the door. The moment he turned around, Clara whispered from the couch, her face pale with dread. "I told you not to trust him." By morning, the storm had weakened into a soft gray snowfall drifting across the valley. Thin smoke curled from the chimney while the ranch sat quiet beneath fresh snow that reached nearly 2 feet deep along the fences. Cole had not slept. He stood near the barn doors with a steaming cup of black coffee warming his hands as the first week's sunlight spread across the mountains. The white horse remained beside the far pasture fence exactly where it had stood most of the night. Calm, silent, watching. Every few minutes, the animal lifted its head toward the house like it was checking whether Clara was still inside. Cole had spent years around horses, but something about this one unsettled him in a way he could not explain. It did not behave like an animal that wandered in from nowhere. It behaved like it had a purpose. The barn doors creaked open behind him. Clara stepped carefully into the cold morning air wrapped in one of his heavy wool coats. She still looked pale, but there was more strength in her eyes now than the night before. Her gaze immediately found the white horse across the pasture. "It stayed," she whispered softly. Cole nodded once. "Looks like it belongs here more than I do." A faint smile touched her face for the first time since he found her. It disappeared almost instantly. "Sheriff Grady will come back." "Probably." Clara lowered her eyes toward the snow beneath her boots. "You should have let him take me." Cole took a slow drink of coffee before answering. People who need help usually do not show up half dead in a blizzard asking strangers to hide them. Clara wrapped the coat tighter around herself against the cold wind. "You do not understand what is happening in Blackwater Ridge." "Then explain it." Silence settled between them while the wind pushed softly through the pine trees behind the barn. Clara stared toward the mountains as if searching for courage somewhere out there beneath the snow. "About 8 months ago," she said quietly, "I started working bookkeeping records for St. Matthew's Church in town." Cole frowned slightly. Church books do not usually cause this much trouble. These did. Her voice trembled faintly. Money kept disappearing from donation accounts. Large amounts. Thousands at a time. Cole watched her carefully without speaking. "At first I thought it was simple fraud," Clara continued. "Then I found names connected to the payments. Families. Old properties. Private transport companies." She swallowed hard. "And children." The wind seemed colder suddenly. Clara looked down at her hands. Children from county homes. Foster programs. Runaways. Some vanished from records completely. Cole's jaw tightened slightly. Blackwater Ridge was small enough that people noticed when things did not belong. Missing children would not stay hidden long unless someone powerful wanted silence. "You told the sheriff?" Clara let out a bitter laugh without humor. "Sheriff Grady signed some of the transport permits himself." Cole slowly lowered his coffee cup. Somewhere behind them, One of the ranch horses shifted nervously inside the barn stall. Clara rubbed her arms for warmth before continuing. I copied everything I could find. Names, ledgers, payment records. I was supposed to leave town 3 nights ago, but they found out. Clara nodded weakly. Somebody searched my apartment. I barely escaped. Cole looked toward the distant town, barely visible beneath the snowy hills. Blackwater Ridge had always felt quiet on the surface. Church festivals, rodeos, farmers, ranchers, the kind of place where people waved from pickup trucks and left doors unlocked. But underneath that quiet, there had always been something else too. Something colder. He remembered the way Sheriff Grady looked at the white horse last night. Fear. Real fear. Before Cole could speak again, the white horse suddenly lifted its head sharply toward the northern road. Its ears pinned back slightly. A low, uneasy sound rumbled in its chest. Clara noticed it too. What is wrong with it? She whispered. Cole stared toward the road beyond the trees. Through the falling snow, another truck slowly appeared in the distance, heading toward the ranch. The truck moved slowly through the snow-covered road until it stopped beside the front fence of the ranch. Cole narrowed his eyes against the pale winter light, while Clara instinctively stepped closer to the barn wall behind him. The white horse remained perfectly still near the pasture, watching the vehicle with calm attention. After a moment, the driver stepped out alone. An older man in a dark coat lifted one hand carefully, as if approaching frightened animals. Easy there, he called across the wind. I'm not here looking for trouble. Cole did not move. Then you picked the wrong ranch. The man gave a tired smile before removing his hat. Gray hair clung damply to his forehead from melted snow. Name is Pastor Benjamin Hale. Clara suddenly stiffened beside the barn door. You know him? Cole asked quietly. Clara nodded slowly, but did not speak. Pastor Hale looked toward her with visible relief. Thank God, he whispered. You are alive. Clara folded her arms tightly across her chest. You should not have come here. I had to. The pastor glanced nervously back toward the road before stepping closer to the fence. Sheriff Grady is half the town searching the mountains. Cole noticed the fear in the old man's face immediately. Whatever was happening in Blackwater Ridge had frightened even the local pastor. What do you want? Cole asked. Pastor Hale hesitated before reaching slowly. Inside his coat pocket. Clara instantly tensed, but the old man only pulled out a worn leather notebook wrapped in cloth. This belonged to your wife, he said quietly to Cole. The world seemed to stop moving for a second. Even the wind felt silent. Cole stared at the notebook without breathing. Where did you get that? Pastor Hale swallowed hard. Emily gave it to me 2 weeks before she died. Clara looked back and forth between them in confusion while Cole stepped toward the fence slowly. His wife's name had not been spoken much around the ranch in years. Most people in town had learned not to mention her after the accident. But hearing it now felt like reopening an old wound beneath the snow. Why would Emily give you anything? Cole asked carefully. Pastor Hale lowered his eyes. Because she was investigating the same records Clara found. Clara looked stunned. Emily Mercer knew about the missing children? Not everything, the pastor admitted, but enough to scare her. Cole's jaw tightened painfully. Memories rushed back all at once. Emily sitting late at night with papers spread across the kitchen table. Emily asking strange questions about church donations. Emily growing quieter during the last few months before her truck slid off the icy canyon road 3 winters earlier. He had always believed grief was making him imagine connections that did not exist. Until now. Pastor Hale slowly held the notebook out toward him. She wrote names inside. Dates too. Cole took the notebook carefully. The leather felt cold against his rough hands. Inside the front cover, he immediately recognized Emily's handwriting. Clean. Steady. Familiar enough to tighten something deep inside his chest. Clara stepped closer beside him while the wind carried soft snow across the pasture. Why are you helping us? She asked the pastor quietly. Pastor Hale looked toward the white horse standing beyond the fence line. Because some secrets poison an entire town if they stay buried too long. The horse suddenly lifted its head sharply toward the distant road again. This time, several vehicles appeared far below through the snowy valley. Sheriff trucks. Moving fast. Pastor Hale's face lost all color. They followed me, he whispered. Cole looked down at Emily's notebook in his hands while the cold wind swept across the ranch. Then he opened to the first marked page and saw a list of children's names written beside large cash payments. The sound of engines carried through the valley long before the vehicles were visible. Snow still drifted softly across the ranch, but the air had changed. It felt heavier, tighter, as if the land itself recognized what was coming. Cole stood beside the barn with Emily's notebook open in his hands, the pages trembling slightly in the wind. Clara stayed close to him, her eyes locked on the distant road where dark shapes were beginning to form through the falling snow. Pastor Hale stepped back from the fence, his voice low and urgent. They should not be here this early. Cole did not look up from the notebook. How many? Clara asked quietly. The pastor hesitated. At least 4 vehicles. Sheriff Grady is with them. The white horse suddenly moved for the first time in several minutes. It stepped forward from the pasture into clearer view, standing between the ranch and the approaching road like a silent barrier. Its head lifted slightly, ears forward, completely still otherwise. Clara noticed it immediately. It knows, she whispered. Cole finally closed the notebook halfway, his eyes narrowing toward the valley. Knows what? Clara did not answer right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the horse. That something is about to happen here. The wind shifted direction suddenly, carrying a deeper cold across the ranch. Snowflakes swirled faster around the barn corners. In the distance, the sheriff vehicles began climbing the final stretch of road toward Mercer Ranch. Pastor Hale lowered his head. I should not have brought the notebook here. I thought I was protecting you. Cole's voice stayed calm but firm. You did not bring them here. They were already coming. Clara looked at Cole then, her voice barely above the wind. They know I survived. Cole nodded slowly. Yes. Another long silence followed. The approaching engines grew louder, clearer, closer. Clara wrapped her arms tightly around herself. If they take me back to town, everything disappears. The records, the names, the children. Cole looked down at Emily's handwriting again. Each name felt heavier than the last. Then they are not taking you anywhere. Pastor Hale shook his head slightly. Cole, you do not understand. Sheriff Grady controls the town council, half the businesses, and most of the county transport records. If you stand against him, you will be standing alone. Cole finally closed the notebook completely. I have been alone for a long time. The white horse suddenly let out a low, sharp sound that cut through the wind. It turned its head toward the sky briefly, then back toward the road. Clara stepped closer to Cole instinctively. I do not think it is just them anymore, she said softly. What do you mean? Before she could answer, the first sheriff truck appeared at the top of the ridge, headlights cutting through the snow like blades of light. It stopped for only a moment, then began descending slowly toward the ranch gate. A second vehicle followed, then a third. Pastor Hale whispered, God help us. Cole did not move. His eyes stayed fixed on the lead truck as it came closer, close enough now that the outline of Sheriff Grady could be seen behind the windshield. Clara's breathing quickened. What do we do? She asked. Cole placed Emily's notebook carefully inside his coat. Then he looked toward the white horse standing between them and the approaching convoy. We find out why my wife died, he said quietly, and we make sure they cannot bury it again. The trucks rolled closer through the snow, tires crushing the silence of Mercer Ranch as the wind carried the sound of something inevitable arriving. The first sheriff truck stopped at the bottom of the long snowy driveway, its headlights cutting through the falling snow like 2 pale beams pressing into the ranch. Behind it, the second and third vehicles slowed into position, forming a quiet line beneath the gray winter sky. Cole stood at the edge of the barnyard with Emily's notebook sealed inside his coat, his breath steady despite the tension tightening across the land. Clara stayed close behind him, her eyes fixed on the vehicles as if she already knew nothing good was coming from them. Pastor Hale stood slightly to the side, his hands folded tightly as though he was praying without words. The white horse remained between the ranch and the road, unmoving, like a boundary drawn in silence. Sheriff Grady stepped out of the lead truck first. He adjusted his coat slowly, looking around the property with controlled calm. 2 deputies followed behind him, scanning the barn and house. The sheriff's voice carried across the snow. Cole Mercer, we need to talk. Cole did not move forward. Then talk from there. Sheriff Grady gave a faint, tired smile. You are making this harder than it needs to be. Clara's grip tightened slightly on Cole's sleeve. The sheriff's eyes shifted briefly toward her. Miss Whitmore, you are not safe out here. You know that. Clara stepped forward just enough for her voice to carry. I was never safe in your town. A flicker of irritation crossed the sheriff's face before disappearing. He turned his attention back to Cole. That notebook you are holding belongs to evidence in an active investigation. Cole's hand moved slightly toward his coat. It belongs to my wife first. The wind picked up again, rolling snow across the yard in soft waves. The white horse lowered its head slightly, shifting one step forward. Sheriff Grady noticed it again. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That animal needs to be put inside, he said. Cole answered calmly. It is not yours to order. A long silence stretched between them. One of the deputies leaned closer to the sheriff and whispered something Cole could not hear. Grady did not respond immediately. Instead, his eyes narrowed as he studied the ranch, the barn, the house, the people standing between him, and something he clearly wanted hidden. Pastor Hale finally spoke, his voice careful. Sheriff, this does not have to go any further. Grady turned toward him slowly. You should not be here, Reverend. Neither should you, Pastor Hale replied softly. Clara looked between them, her voice shaking slightly. You are not here to protect anyone. You are here to erase what happened. The sheriff exhaled through his nose. Miss Whitmore, you do not understand the consequences of what you are doing. Cole stepped slightly forward, closing the space between himself and the sheriff just enough to shift the energy in the air. Then explain it. Sheriff Grady hesitated. For the first time, his calm composure fractured just slightly. Some truths destroy more than they reveal, he said carefully. Cole shook his head. No, they only destroy what was already rotten. The wind dropped for a brief moment, leaving an unnatural silence across the ranch. Even the horses inside the barn stopped moving. The white horse suddenly raised its head and turned toward the barn as if reacting to something unseen. Clara followed its gaze. It is not just them, she whispered. Cole looked toward the same direction slowly. From behind the barn, faint footsteps crunched through the snow, separate from the sheriff's group, moving carefully, deliberately, as if someone else had already been waiting on the property long before the trucks arrived. The moment the footsteps sounded behind the barn, everything on Mercer Ranch seemed to tighten at once, as if the land itself had begun holding its breath. Cole turned slowly, his hand instinctively shielding Clara as she stepped closer behind him. The white horse shifted its weight and angled its body toward the noise, ears locked forward, unmoving except for the tension running through its stance. Sheriff Grady and his deputies had not moved yet. They were still near the trucks, watching. But the footsteps were closer now, coming from the narrow path between the barn and the tree line. Snow crunched softly with each step, slow and deliberate. Pastor Hale whispered, "That is not one of mine." Cole did not respond. Clara's voice came out barely above the wind. Then who is it? From the shadows behind the barn, a figure finally emerged. A man in a long dark coat, face partially hidden by a scarf, carrying a worn leather satchel pressed tightly against his chest. He stopped when he saw them, not surprised, not afraid, just tired. Sheriff Grady's posture changed immediately. The calm mask he had worn moments earlier disappeared. You, he said sharply. The stranger did not answer him. Instead, his eyes moved directly to Clara. You made it out, he said quietly. Clara stared at him, confusion and recognition mixing in her expression. I know you, she whispered. Cole shifted slightly, watching the exchange carefully. The man lowered his satchel just enough to reveal a folded stack of papers inside. My name is Daniel Mercer, he said. Cole froze. The name hit harder than the cold air. Sheriff Grady stepped forward a half step. You were supposed to be in custody. Daniel did not look at him. Not anymore. Clara's breathing quickened. You worked at the church, she said. Daniel nodded once. I handled records, transport logs, financial transfers. Pastor Hale closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing for something inevitable. Daniel looked toward Cole now. Your wife came to me before she died. She knew I would not last long inside their system. Cole's voice was low. What did she give you? Daniel lifted the satchel slightly. Everything she found. Names, payments, routes, proof that the children were not lost. They were moved. The words fell into the snow like stones. Sheriff Grady's voice turned sharp. You have no idea what you are doing by bringing this here. Daniel finally looked at him directly. I know exactly what I am doing. I am ending it. The white horse suddenly stepped forward, one slow movement, placing itself directly between Daniel and the sheriff. It did not move again, but its presence shifted the entire space. Clara looked at Cole, her voice trembling. "This is why the horse brought you to me." Cole did not answer immediately. His eyes were on the satchel, on the truth it carried, on the weight his wife had died trying to protect. Sheriff Grady raised his voice slightly. "That evidence does not change anything. It will disappear like everything else." Daniel shook his head. "Not this time." He turned toward Cole. "Your wife trusted me because I had nothing left to lose. That is the only reason I am still alive." The wind rose again, carrying snow across the yard in slow spirals. The ranch no longer felt like a place. It felt like a line drawn in the middle of something much larger. Clara stepped closer to Cole. "If they take that satchel," she whispered, "everything is gone." Cole finally closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them again, his voice was steady. "Then they are not taking it." Sheriff Grady reached for his radio slowly, but before he could speak, the white horse let out a single sharp sound that echoed across the ranch, breaking the silence like a warning that could not be ignored. Every head turned toward it at once, and in that moment, no one moved. The snow had stopped falling, but the silence across Mercer Ranch felt heavier than the storm that came before it. Every figure stood frozen in place as the white horse remained between them, unmoving, its presence stretching the moment into something almost unreal. Sheriff Grady's hand hovered near his radio, but he did not speak. Daniel Mercer stood with the satchel pressed against his chest, watching the sheriff with steady eyes. Cole stood slightly ahead of Clara, his body angled protectively without even thinking about it anymore. Clara's breath trembled as she looked between all of them, as if trying to understand how the world she once knew had collapsed into this single moment. Pastor Hale lowered his head slowly, whispering something under his breath that no one could hear. The wind returned gently, brushing across the snow-covered ground, carrying the faint sound of distant bells from the town below. Sheriff Grady finally spoke, his voice controlled but tight. "You are standing on dangerous ground, all of you." Daniel answered without raising his voice. "No, we are standing on the truth you tried to bury." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You do not understand what will happen if this leaves the valley." Cole stepped forward slightly. "We already understand what has been happening in it." A long silence followed. The white horse shifted its weight just once, its head turning slightly toward Clara, then toward Cole, as if confirming something only it understood. Clara stepped forward slowly for the first time since the confrontation began. Her voice was soft but steady. "Those children had names," she said. "They had families who never stopped waiting." Sheriff Grady exhaled slowly, as if trying to control the situation slipping through his hands. "You think exposing this changes anything? It destroys everything." Daniel tightened his grip on the satchel. "It only destroys what was built on silence." The wind picked up again, swirling snow dust across the ranch yard. Cole looked at Daniel, then at Clara, then finally at the sheriff. Something inside him had settled, like a decision no longer needing words. "Open it," Cole said quietly. Daniel hesitated only a moment before untying the straps of the satchel. Inside were stacked documents, worn notebooks, and folded records marked with dates and signatures. Clara's eyes filled as she saw them. "That is everything," she whispered. "Everything they tried to erase." Sheriff Grady stepped forward abruptly. "Stop this." But the white horse moved for the first time in the entire confrontation. It stepped forward again, placing itself directly between the sheriff and the satchel. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present, like a final boundary that could not be crossed. The sheriff stopped walking. For the first time, uncertainty broke through his expression. Cole looked at him steadily. "It is over," he said. The words did not come with anger, only certainty. Pastor Hale finally lifted his head. "This will not stay buried anymore." Clara turned slightly toward Cole, her voice quieter now. "What happens after this?" Cole looked out across the ranch, toward the distant mountains beginning to catch the first light of morning. The world felt different now, as if something unseen had finally been released. "Then we rebuild what was broken," he said. Sheriff Grady did not answer. He stood still, surrounded by his deputies who no longer spoke. Daniel held the satchel open as the papers shifted slightly in the wind, no longer hidden, no longer lost. The white horse turned slowly toward the rising light, standing calm as the valley beyond Mercer Ranch began to brighten for the first time in what felt like years.